Hello everyone. Enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch.
Daniel, the poor skinny guy, had broken one of his shoulders, a result of physical abuse from his foster father. He was about to turn 24, slowly walking towards the train station about 500 meters away. However, the abandoned gardens in front of the houses in the village created a sense of horror and anxiety. In the thick bushes between the trees, piles of trash had accumulated in the dry grass, and anyone could be hiding there. There were many abandoned buildings here. On his remaining bony shoulder, Daniel carried a gigantic travel bag full of his belongings. It was truly enormous, with a capacity of at least 100 liters, holding all the personal possessions he had accumulated in 24 years. The dark night became even darker as clouds filled the sky. The train ticket, set to take Daniel out of this cursed place in about 2 hours, was booked for 11:21 p.m. local time, and the weather forecast predicted a violent downpour with thunder and possibly hail at 11:16 p.m. Daniel hoped he could find some kind of shelter at the station, although he recalled the local station being in poor condition. Under a canopy or a makeshift shelter would be the best he could hope for. The heavy bag, which he had to hold from underneath, kept sliding off his fall jacket. At times, the bag nearly dropped to the ground, but Daniel caught it just in time. When he bent down suddenly, he immediately felt a sharp pain in his back, but he gritted his teeth and waited for a few seconds until the pain subsided before continuing to walk to the station. The train ticket was in his coat pocket along with his papers and a little money, enough to buy some food. The situation he faced would shake even the coldest and most hardened person, one who had never felt compassion or sympathy. Even those incapable of feeling those emotions would still feel uneasy inside, or perhaps a chill down their spine if they knew what the poor guy had gone through while trying to leave this city. But he didn't give up. Ever since he was a child, his parents had died years ago, and they had taught young Daniel to endure all the hardships and challenges of life with resilience. His father had said that giving up was not an option. No matter how tired or lonely he felt, he had to keep moving forward, and even if he fell, he had to get back up while he still had strength. Daniel had carried these words with him throughout his life, even though he hadn't lived for many years yet. Somewhere to the right, the rumble of wheels on the tracks echoed. The sounds of a train Daniel had recently dreamed of were finally approaching, and he couldn't help but smile as he imagined himself sitting on that train, leaving this place, looking out the window, and listening to a sad playlist through his simple white earbuds that always slid out of his ears. This image was pure happiness to him at that moment. Of course, the scruffy boy couldn't help but think about what was coming next. According to his plan, the next chapter of his life was to start fresh, far away from his hateful foster parents, Mr. and Mrs. Cologne, whom Daniel only felt disdain for. Everything he had gone through over the years would gradually fade from memory, making way for new experiences. And if anyone asked him about his old life, he would pause for a few seconds, then smile softly and say that he didn't remember. He truly hoped that he wouldn't remember. He would be lucky if he accidentally fell, landed awkwardly, and then woke up in a hospital to find out that he had lost his memory and couldn't recover any of his memories. That was the second thing he truly wished for at that moment. Daniel was nearing the train station. As he entered the station area, he immediately headed to the platform. The wind blew into his face as he stood in the open space. He didn't want to go inside the station building because it was quite warm compared to outside, and Daniel feared that if he relaxed on a bench, he might fall asleep and miss the train, with no one waking him in time. So, after looking around and finding no benches or shelters, he decided to stand and wait for the train for 2 hours. To pass the time faster, he took his earbuds out of his pocket. He had hesitated to use them until now because he had been walking through an unsafe area and needed to hear any sounds to feel safer. He plugged the earbuds into his phone and started a random playlist. Lately, he had been drawn to sad music, and his recent playlists were full of sad songs. Standing on the platform and even frowning a bit, Daniel still enjoyed the cool autumn wind blowing into his face, not realizing how quickly time had passed. A song started playing on the playlist by an artist he didn't care for. When he took out his phone to skip the song, he saw that it was nearly 11:16 p.m. Looking up at the sky, he saw the clouds had thickened and gathered tightly above the station, making it look like rain was about to fall, sweeping everything out of sight and leaving only the station's old and decrepit emptiness. Glancing around again, Daniel still found no shelter or canopy, so he decided to step inside the station building. Maybe there would be a few people in there since no one was on the platform. The silence and emptiness, with a skinny young man in the middle of it all, were overwhelming. But his will to live was so strong that he was willing to leave the city he had lived in all his life to start over. However, inside the station, there was also no one, just a lone ticket clerk sitting in a small booth, only visible through a glass panel covered in old and rusted bars. He was quietly working on a crossword puzzle. Daniel looked around and realized he was the only one there. He silently walked to the first bench he saw, his footsteps echoing in the hall, catching the ticket clerk's attention. "Where are you headed?" the clerk called out through a small slot in the window, adjusting his thick glasses on his face. "Are you here to buy a ticket?" "I bought my ticket a few days ago," Daniel replied. "My train will arrive in about 10 minutes. The ticket clerk, surprised, moved closer to the window, resting his hands on the sill, and looked at Daniel with interest. Then he smiled with a slight smirk, saying, "Interesting, young man. Are you sure you're not mistaken? Maybe you bought a ticket for a different train and got confused." "Why do you think that?" Daniel asked, quickly unzipping his coat to pull out the ticket, just to confirm he was headed in the right direction. "You see, you're the only one here," the ticket clerk squinted and said. "You're the only one on this train." The ticket clerk's interest was starting to irritate Daniel. He had no intention of justifying or explaining why he had chosen that train, that destination, or that time. The circumstances had shaped his decision. "I need to reach the destination of this train," Daniel replied, still fairly calm, though a hint of annoyance crept into his voice. "As for why no one else is going there, I don't know." The ticket clerk shook his head and returned to his seat, letting out a light, sneering chuckle. Daniel pulled out his phone to check the time again. It was now 11:16 p.m. The door was closed, but there was a window through which he could clearly see raindrops starting to form. However, the storm had not yet begun. "They lie here, too," he thought, and opened the online weather forecast. But before he could type in his search, he heard the sound of an approaching train again. The wheels screeched on the tracks. With an excited look, Daniel quickly turned off his phone, grabbed the heavy bag he had set down beside him, slung it back over his uninjured shoulder, and headed out of the station. "Have a good trip," the ticket clerk called out as a parting remark. "Aren't you going to check my ticket?" Daniel asked in surprise, turning back toward the ticket clerk with a casual expression. "I trust you," the man said without looking up. Without responding, Daniel hurried out of the station. Outside, it still hadn't started raining, but the clouds seemed even darker. The train had stopped at the platform, and the doors were open. Looking around, Daniel saw no one, but when he scanned the train's windows, he counted just a few people who would be traveling with him. Relieved that he wouldn't be alone on the strange train, he boarded, choosing the first seat he found comfortable and placing his bag on the seat next to him. The earbuds he had tucked under his jacket were now lying on his chest. Making sure he hadn't forgotten anything, he pressed his cheek against the window and plugged his earbuds back into his ears. Sad music started playing again, causing tears to well up in his eyes and stream down his face. Ahead lay an entirely new life. Daniel had decided that nothing should stop him from starting over. He made sure that no stain from the previous chapter would return. A few minutes later, the train doors closed, and raindrops began to appear on the window. Even a small detail like the moment the rain started seemed to be supporting Daniel. He realized that the rain had begun just as the train was leaving, and he took it as a good sign for his fresh start. As the train departed, he felt reassured, knowing that his new life would be better, perhaps even wonderful, certainly much better than this place, where Mr. Cologne and Mrs. Maria, his cruel foster parents, resided. Recalling what had just happened, Daniel returned home quite late. He worked at a large supermarket with a massive customer base. When he returned home late at night, the clock had struck past midnight, and Daniel could only think about whether Mr. Cologne and Mrs. Maria had already gone to bed. If they were asleep, then there was nothing to worry about, but if either of them was still awake, he would have to face a major confrontation. Mr. Cologne was the kind of person who bottled up all his anger, waiting until Daniel came home. As Daniel approached the house, he saw the kitchen light still on. He let out a heavy sigh, trying to gather the strength and patience to endure this nightmare once again, disguised as the people who called themselves his family, the ones who should have supported and shielded him from mental collapse but instead pushed him into the abyss of depression and constant stress, nervous breakdowns, and other miseries. As he opened the gate and stepped into the yard, Daniel glanced at the doghouse near the entrance of the house. In the shabby doghouse that Mr. Cologne had built years ago with damp boards, poor Gus had found his way into their lives, much to Daniel's sadness for him. Gus lay in his kennel, resting his dirty face on his paws, radiating a sense of hopelessness. But his eyes always lit up with hope whenever he saw Daniel. The boy felt ashamed that he couldn't help the poor animal, let alone help himself. As he closed the gate, Daniel tried to summon the courage to enter the house. The moment they had been waiting for, the explosion finally erupted. It didn't matter how hard he tried to resist his gentle nature and convince himself that he needed to defend himself. He couldn't face the fear in moments like these. Even the voice of his father, like a guardian angel whispering in his ear, didn't bring him comfort. The crucial lesson his father had always taught him, that no matter how bad things got or how desperate he felt, he had to stand up and keep going, wasn't helping him now. Mrs. Maria sulked as she stepped out of the room, and Daniel could feel her piercing, hateful gaze burning through him, as if her eyes were tearing apart every corner of his soul to destroy him completely. "This house doesn't have enough work for you to come home this late," her voice dripped with disdain, the tone mocking him. "I had to wait for the shift change. I couldn't leave the supermarket until someone replaced me," Daniel replied softly. As always, after every response, a punch from Mr. Cologne landed squarely on Daniel's face. He only knew to lower his head and clutch his face in pain because he knew that whether he responded or not, he would still get hit, and answering back at least resulted in a lighter punch than not responding at all. "Yesterday you gave me only a few bucks, you little punk. Where's today's money?" Mr. Cologne shouted. Daniel finally mustered the courage to look up, meeting the gaze of his executioners. At the table sat a half-naked man with swollen, dark-circled eyes, the result of an unhealthy lifestyle. Next to him, perched on a backless stool, was his wife, wearing a bathrobe, her eyes looking as if they wanted to tear Daniel into pieces. And then there was darkness, a total, terrifying darkness with no way out. But there was a chance to escape that darkness, and Daniel had taken it. He opened his eyes. It was the familiar nightmare that had haunted him so often. The miserable scene he hoped never to witness again had appeared as he fell asleep on the train. Sad music still played in his earbuds, and outside the window, it was as dark as inside the train, but the rain had stopped. Daniel rubbed his eyes, groggy, and stared into the dark train car. At first, he saw nothing, but he hoped the train had traveled some distance by now and that there would at least be a few people in the car with him. But there wasn't anyone, the train car was completely empty. It seemed the train had stopped at a station somewhere, but the number of passengers had decreased rather than increased. He could risk moving to another car, but Daniel decided he would be fine staying here. There was no conductor, so he could move freely between cars. With a slight melancholy, Daniel once again looked into the endless darkness hidden between the rows of trees in the forest corridor the train was now passing through. Perhaps it wasn't just a corridor but an entire forest. And somewhere deep within, there could be wild animals, foxes, bears, wolves, ready to tear him apart if he were left alone in the wilderness. But he thought that even being eaten by wild beasts might be better than living the life he had before boarding the train. There were no streetlights, no infrastructure, no signs of life outside the window. Everything was as empty as Daniel's soul. He pulled out his phone to check the time. There were still 6 hours left until the final destination. Yawning, he rested his head against the window once more, gazing between the trees, and drifted back to sleep. By some miraculous way, Daniel woke up just as the train arrived at the station where he was supposed to get off. He stepped off the train and found himself in a bustling railway station. Clearly, there were far more people here than in his hometown when he had left, and now he could feel that he was no longer alone. There was no annoying ticket clerk who would say that he had bought a ticket for the wrong train and interfere with someone else's life. Looking around, Daniel realized that his bag was slipping off his shoulder. His slippery coat made it impossible for the strap to stay in place, so he had to hold the bag from underneath with his hand. But in the excitement of experiencing these new surroundings, Daniel had completely forgotten about it. He managed to grab the bag at the last second, just as it was about to fall onto the asphalt. Once again, he had to bend down suddenly to catch the bag, and this time, it caused a sharp pain in his broken shoulder. When he straightened up, Daniel immediately saw a dark-skinned man standing in front of him, seemingly appearing out of nowhere, dressed in strange, colorful woolen clothing. The man looked young, around 40 years old, but his face, though it had youthful eyes and lips, showed the marks of experience. His face was quite wrinkled. At first, Daniel didn't understand what was happening. The man looked at him with an expressionless gaze, or rather with curiosity, as if he was trying to read Daniel's soul. After a few seconds, the man's face showed fear, perhaps even horror. "Why are you here?" the man asked. "Who are you running from?" Surprised, Daniel replied. "What are you talking about? Who am I running from? I see you didn't come here by chance. I see you're afraid of the life you're running away from," the man said. Daniel fell silent, unable to find the words to describe his feelings at that moment. Daniel had never believed in mysticism, fortune-telling, or anything like that. But he couldn't turn away and ignore the situation. He wanted to keep listening to what the dark-skinned man had to say. "I'm scared," Daniel admitted, and only then did he realize he had said it almost automatically. He hadn't consciously tried to respond. Daniel was even a bit frightened by this realization, but the fear quickly faded as the man began speaking again. "Don't be afraid," the man said, looking at Daniel as if he could see deep into his soul. "The life you've left behind will never return to you. Rather, it will try to return, but you won't let it. Your life, as you wish it, begins anew. The stars and the sky are guiding you to the happiness you truly deserve. Your fate is now in the hands of mystical forces, which will prevent the return of the hell you have endured. You've come home, Daniel." Daniel's thoughts swirled, his face full of confusion and even a little fear. He didn't understand how this man knew his name. Could the man have recognized something about Daniel's fate just by looking at him? Daniel had heard that fate could be predicted by reading palms, but he'd never heard of someone predicting another's future just by looking at them. The dark-skinned man clearly possessed some kind of supernatural power that Daniel couldn't comprehend. Then, the mysterious man stepped back, slowly nodding with confidence, before turning and walking away, eventually disappearing into the crowd. Daniel stood still, unable to understand or process what had just happened. He could barely move, his limbs stiff, and the only thing he could do was stand there and blink. Thank you for watching the video all the way through. You are our biggest motivation to keep creating. Let us know where you're watching from so we can see how far this video has reached around the world. Don't forget to hit like if you found it interesting, and share it with your friends too. His ability to control his body only returned moments after the fortune teller had vanished from sight, blending into the busy station. The stranger had left Daniel in a prolonged state of bewilderment. Trying to push the thoughts away, Daniel continued to walk, searching for a place where he could stay long-term. The house, as you can see, is pretty small, and of course, it needs a lot of renovation, but unfortunately, we can't afford to do it, the young woman, about Daniel's age, said with sadness on her face as she walked around the house, explaining everything inside. Every room had its own story, which she shared eagerly, though each story seemed to bring her to tears. "Why did you decide to sell it?" Daniel asked as she examined the peeling wallpaper in the living room. "The renovation costs aren't that high. The house isn't bad, and the area is quiet. From what I understand, this house holds a lot of sentimental value for you." "You know, Daniel," Alyssa, the girl selling the house, said with a sad expression. "Sometimes in life, there comes a moment when you just want to shed all the old things. You want to step into a new life, with a fresh breath, and completely leave the past behind. Of course, this house holds precious memories for me. I was born here and spent most of my life here. But those memories won't allow me to move forward. I want to move forward, do something different, but all I can do now is come back here, read my childhood diaries, and think about the times when my parents were still alive. I miss them terribly, but I feel like I need to move on. Maybe if they were still alive, they'd want me to do that." In every word Alyssa said, Daniel found an echo of his own story. It was as if two old friends had met again after a long time and started sharing their lives, only to be surprised by the similarities in their journeys. "I understand," Daniel nodded. "I completely understand. But why are you selling it so cheap? Letting go of memories is always hard. You know, memories aren't made to be exploited. Memories are meant to be forgotten, sooner or later, leaving only the most pleasant moments in your mind. Besides, even if I had priced the house higher, I doubt anyone would have been interested." The deal was finalized on the same day. In a carefully stored bag was a significant amount of money, enough to buy the small house. The money Daniel used to purchase the new house, which he planned to decorate entirely to his liking, had been saved up over the years. Sometimes, he had to lie to his cruel foster parents about his actual salary. He didn't know why he had saved the money, perhaps it was a habit instilled by his late father from a young age. From that age, Daniel had strictly followed his father's life instructions. He had always admired how well prepared his father was for life and how he had prepared his son. One could say Daniel had saved for a rainy day, and that rainy day, as expected, had finally come. All the legal procedures to transfer the house's paperwork took a few more weeks. Grateful for the tremendous service, Alyssa bid Daniel farewell, asking him to take good care of the house. Alyssa had no doubt that the new owner of the old house would fulfill her request, as she had found a kindred spirit in Daniel. From time to time, they still kept in touch to see how life was treating each of them. Daniel quickly settled into his new home, located in a remote area outside the city, in a small village. However, the place had everything Daniel needed for a comfortable life: nature, tranquility, and peace. These were the things he had longed for over the years. Gradually, he started settling into the new house. The small house was indeed tiny but quite cozy. The decor was old and unremarkable, with old furniture, including a wooden bunk bed, filling the home and blending well with other antique pieces like Persian rugs, some of which were even hanging on the walls. The only thing Daniel didn't like was that the wallpaper in the living room had begun peeling from the ceiling to the floor, revealing some faded newspapers behind it. While tidying up the living room, Daniel couldn't help but notice this. He climbed onto the couch and tried to read what was written on the newspaper but couldn't make out any words. He decided to return to it later. Just as he was about to get down, he noticed something resembling a piece of paper stuck behind the layer of wallpaper. With a bit of effort, Daniel managed to pull the paper out of the hole. It was 2 standard-sized sheets of paper, folded into quarters. One of the sheets was handwritten, and Daniel immediately noticed that the handwriting was very small. Although he hadn't had the chance to thoroughly examine the handwritten paper yet, the other sheet, which was printed and beautifully decorated, caught his attention more. "Is this a will?" he wondered as he read the large letters written on the beautifully decorated paper, confirming that it was indeed a legally drafted will. Daniel immediately became more interested in the second sheet containing the handwritten text. The entire page was filled with very small but legible writing. Daniel moved to the couch, sat down comfortably, and began reading what was written on the paper. My dear Alyssa, know that one day you will find this letter. Perhaps after your mother and I have passed away, you will renovate the house and happen to find this note. Or perhaps your man will find it for you. I cannot predict the circumstances under which this letter will reach you, but I am certain that sooner or later, you will find it. I cannot state the exact date when your father and I will depart. Perhaps we will die on the same day like in a play or a romantic movie, or perhaps fate will separate us in some other way. I am sorry that I cannot know this in advance. But what I do know for certain is that after your father and I pass away, you may be a little happier if you find this will. What this will conveys to you is something you have never seen before, something you have never known and should not have known. Even though your father and I have tried our whole lives to raise you to be a hard-working girl who approaches everything with a sense of responsibility, we could not know what you would do if you learned about this will too early. As they say, money corrupts people, and a large sum of money turns people into wild animals. The money we want to pass on to you has been saved by your father and me throughout our entire lives. You remember how we always told you to save money for a rainy day, right? Well, your father and I followed that rule. We have saved enough money that could likely last you for the rest of your life. Yes, Alyssa, we lived a life that was nearly impoverished, but your father and I never lost hope that things would eventually get better. We were in debt, deeply indebted to the bank, and threatened by big, tough men. But we endured it all, endured because we always believed that you would have a wealthy and happy life ahead. Both your father and I have grown old and ill. So, all of our hopes now rest on you, Alyssa. We believe that you will not bring shame to the family. Perhaps this money will help you start the project you've been thinking about. It would be wonderful if that project succeeded, and you were able to achieve your dreams. I'm writing this letter on the day of your high school graduation. I can hardly believe how quickly time has passed. Every day you went to school in the morning, from your first day of first grade to your last, I worried about you. I worried that you would get bad grades and that it would affect your mood. I worried that you might be bullied and unable to defend yourself against the bullies. I worried that something dangerous might happen to you, something your grandmother and I couldn't bear. But now everything is okay. You've become an adult, a young woman stepping into adulthood with awareness. I remember you wanted to study art to become a painter. It's a very promising profession, and I pray that God grants you success. Alyssa, my dear daughter, remember that your father and I are putting all of our hopes into you. Honestly, I hope that even if you don't meet all our expectations, you will still be happy. After all, happiness is different for everyone, and your father and I have no right to decide what you should want. We don't know exactly how much money we will have saved by the time we're gone, but even now, that money is enough for you to live comfortably for nearly your entire life. Yes, we could have built a grand mansion, but we chose to leave it to you instead. Both your father and I understand that you have a good mind and will surely accomplish something truly meaningful in this life, rather than simply owning grand mansions or expensive cars just to dazzle others. Mom and Dad sincerely hope that, even if you don't become great in everyone's eyes, at least you will become great in ours. Don't disappoint us, Alyssa. We believe in you. By the time you read this letter, it means our lives have ended, and we can no longer see you every day or care for you. We hope that you'll find a kind man who will love you through sickness, through hard times, and who will hold your hand through all the trials of life. After reading this deeply emotional letter, Daniel felt a powerful chill run down his spine. Tears welled up in his eyes, ready to fall down his cheeks. The letter left by the homeowner's mother stirred emotions in Daniel that he hadn't felt in a long time. The last time he had experienced such emotions was right after his own parents passed away, when he recalled the beautiful moments he shared with them. He remembered his childhood, especially playing with his father, and the way his mother would cook delicious meals for him. As Daniel flipped to the back of the paper, he noticed there was more writing, but it was much shorter, only about a line and a half, in the same small handwriting as on the front page. After reading what was written, he discovered where Alyssa's late parents had hidden a large sum of money, which they had saved to ensure Alyssa's financial security and a comfortable old age. It was in an old shed just 20 meters from the house, so getting there wasn't a problem. The only inconvenience was that the path leading to the shed had become overgrown with tall grass during the summer, and now dry grass tangled underfoot, creating a tripping hazard. But Daniel didn't think much of that. The most important thing now was to check if the money was really there. After some final struggles, Daniel managed to retrieve the precious box. He hurried out of the shed and back to the house, where there were no endless cobwebs and no dirt. Once inside, he locked the door from the inside, quickly took off his shoes and coat, and headed straight to the living room. It was time to open the box. Daniel prepared himself, gathered his courage, and opened the lid. What he saw inside truly surprised him. There was indeed a lot of gold and silver, and Daniel realized that this sum could truly secure Alyssa a comfortable life well into old age. Without thinking too much, Daniel quickly grabbed his phone from the table and called Alyssa. He hoped that the previous owner of the house would answer quickly, and sure enough, Alyssa answered without making Daniel wait long. "Hello, Alyssa," Daniel exclaimed as soon as the phone stopped ringing. "I have some news for you, but I'm not sure how you'll take it." "Hello, Daniel," Alyssa replied, her voice full of confusion. "What's going on?" "It's 10 p.m., is something wrong?" "Yes, and it's quite important." "Can you come right now?" "I really hope you can, Alyssa. This is something very urgent that needs to be handled immediately, you need to come now." "All right, I'll be there," Alyssa answered, still confused with a hint of worry in her voice, which Daniel could sense. "I'll be there in 35 minutes. Wait for me." "Okay, I'll wait," Daniel said and hung up. When Alyssa arrived, she called Daniel, who then opened the door. As soon as Alyssa stepped in, Daniel immediately led her to the living room, where the 2 sheets of paper lay. "Listen," Daniel said. "These things might make you very emotional and maybe even cry, but it might be worth it. I found this, now sit down on the couch and read." Alyssa read the will in silence, not fully grasping the content. The writing was somewhat vague, and the phrasing was a bit difficult to understand. The document mentioned that she would inherit a certain amount of money but did not specify an exact figure. "So what?" Alyssa asked, surprised, handing the will back. "This is a will. As far as I understand, the house was passed down to me through the will." "Yes, but it doesn't mention the money," Daniel continued. "And now, please be patient." He paused. "It might be hard for you to read this. I was moved to tears, and I have no connection to your situation. So you might be deeply affected. If you need water or anything to calm down, just tell me." Alyssa carefully took the handwritten letter and began reading it cautiously. It took her about 10 minutes to finish, but after just 3 minutes, she had already started crying. She had makeup on, and her tears smudged her mascara down her cheeks. When she finished reading the letter, she quickly handed it back to Daniel. Alyssa stood up abruptly from the couch and walked to the window, placing her hand on the windowsill, silently looking out into the dark garden. "Do you want me to bring you some water?" Daniel asked, concerned. "If you need anything, let me know, Alyssa. This all started because of me, and if it weren't for me, you would never have known about this and wouldn't feel so hurt." "I'm okay," Alyssa replied, trying to contain her sorrow. "So what about the money? You didn't read the back of the letter. It mentions where the money is hidden. I went there and found the box. I swear I didn't take anything. You'll see it's all still there when you check the box, it's covered in dust." Daniel led Alyssa to the place where her parents had left the money. When she saw it, Alyssa was even more emotional. She threw her arms around Daniel and sobbed, making Daniel feel a little awkward but deeply empathetic toward Alyssa. In a gesture of gratitude, Alyssa offered to share a significant portion of the money with Daniel, but Daniel firmly refused to take even a bit. Alyssa, I appreciate your kindness, but I don't want to take it. I'm a young man, I have health, youth, and ambition. I can make a living on my own. Besides, this is the hard-earned savings of your parents, saved out of their deep love for you, so I can't accept it, Daniel said honestly. Tears immediately rolled down Alyssa's cheeks, and she admitted that she rarely encountered people as honest and kind as Daniel in her life. She was deeply grateful that Daniel hadn't hidden the information and had told her everything. As time passed, the more Alyssa interacted with Daniel, the more she saw him as a genuinely kind person who never cared about gaining anything from others. He treated everyone well, not just a select few. Alyssa fell in love with Daniel, always watching over him. She quietly thought, "Dear Mom. Dear Dad. I found him, the man you both wished for." Alyssa smiled to herself, gazing lovingly at Daniel. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support encourages us to continue bringing heartfelt stories almost every day. We truly appreciate your support. See you next time.
If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.